Hello, today is March 13th, 2018. Hi, I'm Paul Glumaz, once again with you, with the LaRouche Political Action Committee. And today is the day that Rex Tillerson left, or he didn't leave, but he was fired. And uh, Mike Pompeo was chosen by Donald Trump to be the new Secretary of State. So a lot of you out there are kind of like, okay, what's going on here? What's happening? Who's who? What's what? Where's what? All of that. And but you're at a tremendous disadvantage for understanding the situation because the media is not reporting the most profound and fundamental things that have happened in the last 2.5 weeks, the last 2 weeks especially. And without that knowledge, it's very hard to understand why there's such turmoil in the Trump administration. Now, you have to understand that since Dick Cheney and George Bush were president, especially since 2002, it was assumed after the horrible experience that Russia had under the Western carpetbaggers and financiers, where their government was being directed by U.S. advisors, that the horror and destruction of Russia, which is beyond most people's imagination, Russia will never allow that to happen again. And Putin emerged from all of that as Russia's leader, and he's gradually brought Russia back to some degree of stability and economic stability. But there's no way Russia can compete with the U.S. in the military sphere. Their economy is only a fraction of what it was under the Soviet Union. And they lost a lot of their capabilities. They lost a lot of their science through the brain drain. They lost a lot of capability. So it was assumed in places like London and Washington, D.C. that they wouldn't be much of a challenge. However, they did have these Soviet leftover nuclear weapons, which they were somewhat concerned about. So they couldn't really move for conquering Russia right away. So what they decided to do was to escalate the U.S. military capabilities by surrounding Russia with an ABM system and a forward capacity. And they used Iran's alleged nuclear weapon program as the excuse to do this. And so they moved to set up an ABM system in Romania, which they have now, and Poland, which is supposed to go into effect soon. Now, but all of this couldn't be done unless the United States abrogated the ABM treaty from 1974, which they did in 2002. They told the Russians, "Hey, you guys are nobodies. You're, as some people said, you're just a country with a gas station. And you got your people are in a mess, and we're moving in." So what happened was that Putin at that period decided to put the effort into leapfrogging technologically and to modernize Russian forces, but not in a massive scale, but in terms of science and technology. So what they did is they developed a new generation of weaponry and lasers, etc., which were not designed to be offensive per se. They weren't designed to be necessarily defensive, but they were designed to create a situation where the West would not have a winnable nuclear option. The whole policy and the trillions of dollars spent on internationally and the trillions of dollars spent in defense have all been based on the concept of prompt global strike, which is this war-winning capability, and the belief that they could develop advanced computer systems and advanced algorithms that they could essentially preemptively knock out the command structure of Russia and China, and that whatever would come back at them would be handled by the ABM system. So what Putin unveiled on March 1st in the State of Russia's presentation before the parliament there was a new generation of weapons that are unstoppable. And not only that, could be deployed, and even if Russia had been totally obliterated by a nuclear war. One of them is a drone submarine which has a nuclear engine, which can lay, doesn't have to come up, has nuclear weapons, doesn't have to come to the surface, can stay down in the Mariana Trench, can hide anywhere, can hide underneath, and can surf, will have a nuclear weapons capability. The other one is a cruise missile that has a nuclear engine. It doesn't use rocket fuel. It has a nuclear engine, and it does not have a limited range. In other words, it can go and go and go because it has a nuclear engine, and so it could go over Antarctica, up through Latin America, go around the globe the other way, and then come back and hit anywhere in the U.S. or anywhere in the world. And you cannot stop that because a cruise missile flies at a very low altitude, and it can change direction. It's got the latest technology in it. Then there's another huge missile that is launched, which goes up, and when it merges into 6, each of the merged have independent engines. That is, they have engines. They can act like an intelligent missile. They can avoid. They can change their course. Because when a missile, when these MIRVs occur, they have a precise trajectory, which means they can be attacked. They can be with an ABM system, but these do not have that trajectory. And besides, you have 6 MIRVed, essentially rockets, or a sense MIRV, 6 MIRVed. So this is unstoppable. Then they have one that essentially what it does is it heats up the air and creates a plasma. And so essentially the plasma is going through the air, and then within the plasma, the missile's going. And these are hypersonic missiles, and they can gliders, and they can go. One can go 10 times the speed of sound. The other can go 20 times the speed of sound. And not only that, but the one that can go 10 times the speed of sound can be loaded onto a MiG, and the MiG can take off either from land or sea, and it can launch this missile, which is not stoppable. And this has now made all of the U.S.'s group carrier systems totally obsolete, totally vulnerable to being wiped out by a much smaller force of a few MiGs. So this tells you something has happened. And this has had an earth-shattering effect already. 4 senators, Markey of Massachusetts, Sanders of Vermont, Feinstein of California, and Merkley of Oregon, have all written a letter to Tillerson, who's not going to be there. He's going to serve out the month, but to begin a dialogue process with the Russians. Okay, so this is huge. Now this has a huge impact on Korea, because the whole purpose of this whole Korea business is that in 1994, Bill Clinton made an agreement with North Korea, and they were proceeding accordingly. But when this shift occurred in policy around the 2002, they needed an excuse to put up an ABM system like they were doing around. They needed an excuse to do the same thing they were doing around Russia, but in the Pacific. So they played hardball with North Korea. They abandoned the policy of engaging North Korea, and Obama called it strategic patience. But what they did is they created a situation in Korea where they felt they had no choice but to develop a nuclear weapons missile program, which is what the Obama administration did, because that was the basis for them, is to establish the means to keep the U.S. military there, but also to establish the pivot to Asia. And all of this was going on during the Obama administration. And the Trump administration was left with this huge mess. Now, until the end of the Obama administration, Japan was not on good terms with China. Russia was not on was only beginning to come on the best terms with China. South Korea was not on good terms with Japan. Japan was not on good terms with Russia. So all of these situations started to shift as the Chinese Belt and Road got underway, and as the economic situation internationally worsened. Countries like Japan began to see a way of keeping their economies going through expanding their economic activity into eastern Siberia. So there was increasing amount of development deals beginning to take place with the Chinese, with the South Koreans, and most of all with the Japanese, with the far eastern part of Russia. And there have been two major conferences in the last 2 years in the Far East, in Vladivostok, where all of this stuff is starting to occur. So the Japanese are starting to work with the Russians. The Japanese China situation has cooled off. The Japanese are now being offered participation in the Belt and Road by the Chinese. The whole pivot to Asia has collapsed. And the final nail in the coffin was the excuse for creating all of this stuff was the North Korea, but the excuse for which was to ring Russia on the east and China with the THAAD missile deployment and so forth. And what happened is that Putin's announcement on March 1st has rendered all of that obsolete. The first strike capability is not going to be there, and the whole North Korea situation was interwoven into the whole first strike capability. So that is another blow to the whole thing. Now, simultaneously to that, you have the nations all over the world wanting to participate with China in the Belt and Road. So what's happened to U.S. foreign policy, what's happened to the foreign policy of the West, is that it's in complete shambles. They don't know where to go. They don't want to join China's Belt and Road. They don't want to talk they don't want to work out an agreement with the Russians. They don't want to work out an agreement with the Chinese. Tillerson was in Africa trying to stop the Belt and Road. He was attacking the Belt and Road. He was attacking the Chinese in Africa. And it was very contradictory what he was saying in Africa. He was doing the same in Latin America, or not long after the huge conference in Lima, I believe. No, it was in Chile, I believe. The huge conference of all of the Latin American and Caribbean countries were meeting with the Chinese on the development of Latin America and the railway systems and so forth and so on. And Tillerson went against it and tried to organize a coup in Venezuela. So Tillerson is all over the place. The whole Trump administration is all over the place. And then in the middle of all this, North Korea and South Korea started to ease tensions. You had the Olympic Games, where you had a unified Olympic team, and then you had the invitation of the top security people of South Korea to North Korea for talks. And in that invitation, they went to North Korea and they ended up having discussions with Kim Jong-un, who then told them that North Korea was willing to abandon its entire nuclear program and stop the continued development of its missile program if their security could be guaranteed. So then the South Korean security people came to Washington D.C. They talked directly to Trump, and Trump agreed to a meeting. Now this has completely upset the entire structure of power in the U.S. because all of the policy wonks, all of the defense people, it was all geared towards this first strike capability, prompt global strike, and now you have the whole thing being upended by none other than the president. So people like Tillerson and others are caught in this massive kind of what you might call being, stress, being pulled in different ways, being pulled by the professionals, the establishment, the hangers-ons from the earlier administrations, the accepted opinion among the experts, that you would never ever allow this to happen, because once North Korea gives up its nuclear weapons, there's no reason for, and they start to become assimilated into South Korea, there's no need to have such a U.S. military presence in Asia. Who are you going to fight? You're going to fight the Chinese? So this whole thing is an incredible crisis, because you have the Russians demonstrating that you're not going to win a nuclear war, and then you have a situation with a president who doesn't get it. He doesn't get it what the game is. He doesn't even seem to understand that we're an empire and we got to keep on top of the world, and we got to make sure that they obey us, and that if we have to go to nuclear war to make that happen, we have to do that. The president doesn't get it. The president just doesn't get it. He's just not with it. He was elected by the deplorables, and they don't get it either. So so essentially, there's this incredible crisis inside Washington, because they got a president who's not functioning in the same mindset as the entirety of Washington, and often it's very hard to tell what he's coming from his tweets, and you don't know if he's going to nuke North Korea or make peace if you listen to the media. And then he talks about being a good friend of the Chinese president, that he has great admiration for the Chinese president for what the Chinese president has done with China, and therefore he would like to do something similar in the U.S. He would like to bring the United States to a much better future. So this is all causing a tremendous crisis in the institutions of policy in the United States. Incredible crisis. I can just imagine the crisis, and so it's a very, very dangerous period. I think President Trump's life is definitely in danger. Now, the British have responded in the most extreme way. They are accusing Russia, without any evidence being presented, that Russia used some kind of nerve gas to paralyze a former KGB colonel turned spy, who, by the way, works for Christopher Steele's Orbiz company, or Orbiz was just connected to Christopher Steele. So Christopher Steele is this guy's essentially boss, and this guy is and his daughter are paralyzed, and the British have gone totally berserk on it. They have presented no evidence to show that it was Russia had anything to do with anything, and Theresa May has given a 36-hour ultimatum or something like that to Russia to fess up to what they did. And the foreign policy spokesperson, media person for Russia said, you don't give ultimatums to a nuclear power. You don't do that. So the British are totally freaked out. They're talking to Trump right now about it. They're going to try to get something going into escalated conflict against Russia at this time, because they are losing, and they have lost. But there's still a rear guard fight going on to deal with this. So that's the context in which everything is going on. Everything is shifting very fast. And the other thing is the Brexit uh, will require unwinding a whole bunch of derivatives um, because of the relationship to the euro. It's not. I don't quite fully understand this, but there's a huge financial crisis connected to the Great Britain's exit from the euro. So now I'm going to go on to a much higher level here. The situation is not properly understood unless you understand that we are dealing with a 600-year history in the Western civilization, and we take you back to the early 1400s during the beginning of the Italian Renaissance. It's out of the Italian Renaissance that the very concept was developed called the Commonwealth, and the idea was that the king or the ruler was responsible for the people, was responsible to the people, not the other way around. And the idea was that the king was purpose was to promote the good, or the humanist king in this case, or the humanist prince was there to promote the good. The king wasn't there just to be there to keep the laws, but he was there to promote the good. So this whole idea of a nation that is actively promoting the general welfare of its people is partly part of the birth in the Renaissance. Now, a very important feature of this was the role of Joan of Arc, because you have a very corrupt society. You know, everyone's changing sides. You have mercenary armies. No one wants to fight except unless they get paid, and you have no concept of a nation. You have just a bunch of aristocracy and serfs and mercenaries and some priests. That's basically your society. So what she did is she went to the king, and because she represented the purity of a woman, of a virgin, and she was able to rally the French against the British, and she was able to say, "I am France. You know, I represent metaphorically the French nation. What is the French nation? It's the good. What is a nation? It's the idea of the good. It's the idea of the beautiful. It's the idea. It's not an idea of corruption. The idea of a nation is completely anti-corruption. It's the idea of a nation, and so today most people don't believe that. They believe the purpose of a government is not to promote the good, not at all, but to be just there to keep the laws and let whatever happens. It's called laissez-faire. So this is where we've gone from being a nation to being really not a nation. We are really not a nation right now. We have all these special interests. We have all these different factions, but they don't represent a concept of a whole nation and its general welfare. The concept of the general welfare of the United States, which used to exist under Lincoln, under Hamilton, under FDR, under Kennedy, just doesn't exist anymore. And we're going to have to go back to that. And to some degree, Donald Trump is a reflection of the desire to go in that direction. So this issue of the nation or the Commonwealth is at the core of the last 600 years, and it's at the core of where the United States potentially could go or not go in the coming period.